Hello, I'm Los Angeles City Controller Ron Galperin, and I'm so pleased to be part of the Los Angeles Public Library's continued work to promote financial literacy. All year long, the library, through its outstanding Department of Lifelong Learning, hosts life-changing programs that teach and support financial empowerment, immigrant integration and inclusion, and health and wellness. And the best part about it is that it's all free. As controller of our city, I make sure that public dollars are being put to good use, keeping our government honest, responsive, and accountable. Because people want to know and deserve to know that their government is doing its best to serve them. While it's important for the city to plan how we use our money wisely, I want you all to know that it's just as important for you to do the same. Because the city's financial health depends on the financial health of all Angelenos. The programs that the library is hosting this week and throughout the year are here to help everyone succeed and to make positive financial choices for our futures. I'm so grateful to all of our libraries and incredible staff, and VITA and its volunteers for all they do to ensure that you and your families have the tools and resources not only to prepare your taxes, but to help you be on the right financial track. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bob Timmerman, and I'm the Senior Librarian for the Science, Technology, and Patents Department at the Los Angeles Public Library's Central Library. Welcome to today's presentation called Elder Care Workshop, Developing a Plan of Action for Your Loved One. This program is part of an ongoing series of programs intended to support financial literacy and is brought to you by the Financial Planning Association and the Los Angeles Public Library. Today's program with Jamie Rugg will discuss the importance of making a plan for caring for a loved one or yourself as the person ages. These situations are difficult both financially and mentally, and we hope that this evening you can start to make a plan about this very important matter. Please send us your questions throughout the program, and we will have a Q&A session after the presentation. Tomorrow afternoon at noon, there will be another presentation entitled Financial Literacy Basics that will be presented by Bank of the West. On Saturday, there will be a day of pro bono that is free financial planning from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. But you must sign up ahead of time on the library's website and our Financial Planning Week website. The moment all the slots are filled, but there is a waiting list in case of no-shows, so please check the website if you are interested. And now for our presentation.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our discussion on caring for an aging loved one. My name is Jamie Rugg. I am a certified financial planner and part of the Financial Planning Association. We are so grateful to be with you. Certainly, this is a topic that I think is near and dear to a lot of our hearts when we think about loved ones that are our parents or grandparents, whether it's ourselves and other close friends and relatives who are starting to think about what does that look like down the line? How do I start to account for making a care plan? And what are the considerations? How much does it cost? What should we be thinking about? And how should I help myself get to that stage? So these are a lot of the things we'll touch on in a bit here. And one point I want to make as we get going in just a moment, we'll cover that overview of some life expectancy and some expected costs. We'll talk about planning for that cost of care because it's understandably, it has become a substantial cost for our later years. It also will discuss some power of attorney documents as well as kind of some of the estate planning implications that we should really think about when talking about our elder care planning or thinking down the line. We want to really focus too on letting you have some takeaways after our presentation today. So what are the things we really want to consider? What should I do next if I'm just starting this out or if I'm thinking about it for myself? or if I want to have that conversation with a family member or loved one. And then, so we'll talk about some of those ways that you can start to put things into action, things that'll help you feel more prepared or start to facilitate some of those initial conversations. So, and to where I'm going to go from here, it's going to be, we're going to go a bit heavier on some of the specifics related to costs and some of the data therein. There's a substantial amount. We want to come at it from a planning perspective to kind of have you understand how we approach this as certified financial planners, what we consider when we're looking, and if a client comes to us saying, hey, I'm trying to figure out what this looks like, or I'm trying to take care of my aging parent, how much does this cost? What am I really looking at? Do I have enough? Am I in a good place? And so we'll approach it from that angle first, but then certainly we don't want to underestimate or undervalue the importance of kind of those subjective pieces, the emotional ties, and what this really means to our loved ones, because there's so much more to it than just the financial aspect. So with that, what we're not going to cover, what we're not going to do during our workshop today, we're not going to provide any direct legal advice. I am not an attorney, and nor would I ever provide that to you. So I strongly recommend, if you do have additional questions, or you know that there are some things that need to be taken care of within your own estate plan, or after some of the conversations today, we would highly encourage you to seek out some of the resources. We'll share some great resources at the end of the presentation. And just want you guys to make sure you're doing your research when you're considering who to speak with, who to entrust with some of these really important decisions, and to make sure they're executed properly. We also won't tell you directly how to handle a specific situation. There's so many factors that come into play, especially when it's caring for loved ones. And it's really important. That's why we want to emphasize the discussion part, and really having that conversation, if it's you, to have with your family members, and vice versa, so that we're taking a lot of these pieces into account, because there truly isn't one size fits all for how we handle this. And of course, related to that, we're not going to recommend a specific course of action. What we will want you to do is have some takeaways, have some resources, have a better idea of what this kind of this amorphous thing that's planning for aging or a care plan looks like, and then continue on to find out some more information for yourselves. All right, so some of the key concepts we'll talk about. First and foremost, the planning ahead, right? If you're watching this workshop, you're here today, you're already honestly ahead of the majority of our country in some ways, or you're already dealing with a situation like this that's come up within your family, or you're just trying to be proactive. So that as much as we can plan ahead and have these conversations, organize these documents, do a lot of this planning before any sort of event could occur. It's so crucial, because you want to have everything ready to go, so that if something does occur, you already have all your documents ready, your family knows where it is, you understand what their preferences are and their priorities are, and there isn't any scrambling. A lot of the stress we actually see within families, and specifically with family caregivers, really revolves around there's just that huge emotional toll. And I certainly have had a couple client experiences where that was really exacerbated, because the aging parent actually did not have a plan in place and had not specified exactly what their wishes were for their child. And their child is then trying to decide, what would my parent want in this situation? And it can be a really stressful time, whether that's on the financial side for financial decisions, or the healthcare side, which we'll talk about a little bit later on in the presentation. So secondly, we'll certainly touch on getting organized in a couple places and wrap it up at the end. Those family discussions, talk about power of attorneys, talk about how trusts and estate planning really do play a crucial role in this field, and then from there, defining that aging plan for your loved one. So I would be remiss talking about this if we didn't first at least discuss life expectancy. And with our fantastic advances in this day and age, we're increasing our longevity, but at the same time, it's also increasing some of the costs associated with that as well, and medical care costs are rising too. So if you'll take a look at the graph in front of you here, I do have a number of different charts in this presentation today. If a couple is 65 today, this is the kind of the probability of one or both of them living to a specific age with some of the most recent data that we have. So for, you'll see out there, there's generally women, as we know, generally do outlive men. The current life expectation for someone who is age 65 today, for a woman, it's up to 89 years old. For a man, it's up to 87, but once they've reached age 65. A key part to consider, and I am so sorry that my dog is barking here, is looking at this, the later side to the right of this chart is how the probability of someone, if both people are alive today, there's a very good chance at least one person is going to actually live to age 95. There's a 20% probability at least one person lives to age 95. When you look at age 90, there's actually up to a 49% chance at least one of the two in the couple will live that long. So as we kind of continue on here, these numbers keep getting pushed out further and further, which makes planning for the later years in our lives even more crucial. And on the flip side, of course, that also means thinking through the costs and what that means and making sure we have as much as we can set aside to help cover some of those pieces. So I would be also remiss without talking about spending and kind of the inflation. So we've heard about probably bits about inflation in the last couple year or two here. Oh, it's really low, or historically low inflation, and the cost of goods aren't rising that much. One thing to point out here is actually, of all the different types of categories that they generally track, the one with the highest rate of inflation is actually healthcare. Maybe surprising, maybe not surprising, but on average, the average inflation on an annual basis for healthcare costs was increasing by 4.7% each year between 1982 and 2020. So what that means is, if it costs $100 for Medicare costs last year, the general rough estimate would be it's going to cost $104.70 this next year. But when we look at those numbers in the thousands, it really can start to make a huge difference. On the top part of the chart, we'll also see these are kind of the expected categories people spend in, their actual annual spending percentage of their overall expenses over the course of the year with different age ranges. So in the gray bar, you see that's when people that are getting closer to retirement, and then the purple, of course, are people that are 75 and older. And you'll see in those categories, our largest expenses generally, once we're in retirement, are healthcare and housing. And those continue to rise. And like we said, largest general amount we're spending on it, and it's also the one that's growing at the fastest rate. So it really is crucial we can't have this conversation about aging and caring for an aging loved one without talking about how these costs are expected to increase in the future. And so going into discussing Medicare, because that's the big one we hear. This is what you do once you hit age 65, and then Medicare, you have your Medicare insurance. You select your policy based on what's available geographically for you. A key part, and we'll go over this chart in just a moment, but a key part to think about also, and that a lot of people don't know when you're younger, that yourself or your aging loved one, they have to enroll in the proper enrollment window, which is 3 months before and also 3 months after your birth month, the month in which you turn 65. If our people entering that age 65 do not enroll in the required part of Medicare, they actually have lifetime penalties in terms of some of the costs and associated. So it's really crucial, if you are having this conversation or you have a relative that's approaching age 65 or you're in that window, just ask a quick question. Just make sure that they have looked into Medicare options and that they have enrolled as soon as possible, just to make sure they're not hitting that window. So because it's 3 months before and 3 months after, there's a 7-month window in which people can enroll. And there are certainly different types of plans, which I'll kind of just briefly touch on here. And a key part for us and part of this discussion is that Medicare is really like our traditional health insurance plans. It is not meant to cover long-term sustained illnesses. From the Medicare side, once it's expected that you're not going to recover, the illness or injury is not acute, meaning you're not expected to recover from it. After the certain 90-day plus window, Medicare won't cover those costs anymore. It actually is then considered long-term care. And we do have our Medicaid system in the US. That's kind of the long-term care policy or plan for the country, but it does not cover as much as we think it might. And there are a number of other trade-offs in with that piece as well. So when we look at the chart here and just a quick rundown of what those components of Medicare, some of you might be very, very familiar with this, and if you are, bear with me as I kind of go through it for those who might not be. So the key part is you generally select whether you want to have the traditional Medicare plan or you want to have an Advantage plan. If you have a traditional, as you can see in the chart, you sign up, you generally would very, very strongly encourage to sign up for a Medigap plan. So a traditional plan, you'll have your Part A, your Part B, you'll have your Part D, which is D stands for drugs or prescriptions. But there's often that donut in the middle for specifically prescriptions that can be quite substantial in terms of costs. That if you fall into the window there, it can cost you, I believe it's between $3,500 and up to $5,000 over the course of a year where you're not getting any coverage. It also does not generally cover vision and dental. People often buy Medigap plans or other supplemental plans to cover some of those needs. So the main option two, or more of the traditional Medicare Advantage, like Part C, for example, and you often do have a trade-off where there aren't as many providers available. You might buy one specifically from the Advantage plan through Kaiser, for example. But it does include the prescriptions, but it oftentimes does not include some other pieces. So it's one premium instead of having to have a number of them come out of your Social Security check or out of pocket. But there certainly are trade-offs. The key part, though, if you're looking at this or you've talked about this with a loved one, is really looking at what's available. Because if you're in a small town in the Midwest, there might be only one option. Whereas a place like Los Angeles, we actually have a substantial number of plans to choose from. But it does really behoove us, if we're assisting our aging loved ones, to have those conversations, help them do some research, and just make sure they know what they're getting into when we look at these plans. Also, the Medicare.gov website is a wealth of knowledge on this, of course, and they are very proactive about sending out letters and notices. So it can be rare for people not to sign up in time, but still, we really want to make sure, if you're being more proactive and having those conversations, that you're in the loop as well of what some of these pieces mean. And unsurprisingly, with what we were talking about before, healthcare costs do continue to increase with age. So if you take a look at the chart here on the left-hand side, it's someone that's age 65 this year. And we're looking at, on the far right, that's someone that's age 95 in 2051. When we talked about that inflation rate, that rate of increase in costs and medical costs, this is what those can actually look like in direct dollars. So part of it is going to be the increase in the Medigap coverage premium amount, because that does increase. There are going to be other out-of-pocket costs, as there are assumptions that the individual is going to need more prescriptions or drug costs. And then doctor's visits, those types of physician fees, some of those pieces generally do increase as well. And then there always, like as stated at the top, there always are going to be some uncertainties too. But again, a key point to mention that this does not, long-term care issues would not be covered under this. So if a loved one does fall into that situation where they have a sustained illness, a lot of this is no longer going to be covered for those substantial costs, whether it's in-home aid, nursing home care, extended skilled nursing home or nursing facility care. A lot of those can continue to increase substantially over time, and that's what we want to think about when having those discussions with family. So another piece of this, and this will be the last chart for at least a slide or two. Hope you guys are bearing with me with this. So when Medicare does stop that coverage, like I just mentioned, you've probably heard before, it happens when an individual needs assistance with 2 or more activities of daily living. And I have a chart on this right after, just this description of what that means. But if that paid care is used, if someone does need extended long-term care, on average, they need more than 4 years of care. For 3 out of 10 men and 4 in 10 women actually will need 4 years or more of this extended care. So now when we think about this, this is a discussion that a lot of us have with clients when they're approaching age 50, 55 and start thinking about if they want to look at long-term care insurance. Because these are the statistics. It's 3 in 10 men today, alive today, 4 in 10 women are expected to need long-term care and be in a facility more than 4 years or have in-home care for more than 4 years. And those costs can absolutely be substantial, which we'll see in just a moment. Okay, so those activities of daily living you've probably heard before. So that's when an individual needs assistance with 2 or more, and that's eating, dressing, bathing, transferring, meaning getting in and out of a chair, in and out of a car, toileting, or if there's a severe cognitive impairment. So if an individual, and it doesn't have to be just someone who's older, of course, it can be someone that's younger as well, but if someone needs assistance with dressing and transferring, they technically would fall into the general definition of what long-term care is, if they actually need that in order to go about their day and live their life. And that's where the different trade-offs with this can really happen quickly when we're looking at our aging loved ones, specifically between cognitive impairment and having physical disability. And I would want to mention too, it's not just, of course, about the physical aspect. There's the emotional toll of the aging process. There's the social piece as well. If our networks are shrinking, our connections are shrinking, and how that can impact our families. And it's something we want to be proactive in thinking about when we're having those discussions with loved ones as well. So more fun slides about cost data. This is a look at home health aid costs by state. These are kind of the median costs that you would expect to see. Median cost on average is actually $24 an hour for someone to come into the home and actually assist the individual. When we talk about the trade-offs, the main things people think about are, do you want to stay in your current home? Do you have the resources to do that? Do you want to be in more of an assisted living or a nursing facility? Or does someone need to be more in an actual skilled nursing facility where they're needing almost constant assistance from healthcare professionals? A lot of times, and this does vary, but a lot of times, many people do prefer to stay in their homes. So you can have people come into your home and provide that care, but it is, of course, important to know what those costs are. So unsurprisingly, California is in the darker green here and is a bit on the higher end of what we would expect in some of the other states. And I do have this next one I wanted to share looks at, based on the type of service. These are kind of some general numbers, whether it's down south, whether it's on the East Coast, or of course in our great county of Los Angeles. So home health aides in Los Angeles, the average annual cost, this is median too, so this can vary quite substantially depending on a number of factors. So the average median cost is actually just over $66,000 per year. Adult daycare or healthcare, there are daycare facilities. That's substantially less. It's around $20,000. But then we look at nursing home care. We're in a semi-private room, meaning they have someone else in there. That's average cost in Los Angeles is actually $96,000 a year. And an actual private room is $126,000 a year. So big numbers that sound and look really scary on paper. But this is why it's important to just think some of these costs through. And it's not to have you stress about this, but it's to go into those conversations with family or with yourself, just with eyes wide open, looking at some of these trade-offs. In terms of the private homes and private rooms, I mean, I have had clients actually move their aging loved one to a state closer to them, to be closer, to keep an eye on them. And also, as an added benefit, it can be significantly less expensive. On the other side, since we are talking about median costs here, I've had other clients that have had an unexpected health issue, and they're paying substantially more than that private room cost because of the type of health event that actually happened to them and the amount of assistance they need for everything. So it's one of those things, we absolutely don't want that to happen to anybody. We don't want to dwell on these pieces, but and I really am glad so many of you are joining us today just to at least hear this discussion or watch this video after the fact, and just add that into the conversation when you're looking at your own plan or a plan for a loved one. So this kind of talked about a little bit before. So some of those key considerations. How close do you or does your loved one want to be to family? Do they or do you want to move closer? Is that a very important piece? And what are the costs for where they might be moving? Certainly, we've had a number of people that really do choose to move closer to family, to be nearby as they're getting later on in their years, so the family can keep an eye out, but so they also still have that social connection, which really does and frequently does dwindle in the later years in life. Another part is insurance affordability. So when we're talking about these costs for, Medicare only covers this portion, and we're talking about long-term care. If they need 2 or more of those activities of daily living, they need assistance. So what does that mean? How do you account for that cost? They're really the two main systems are Medicaid. That's partially the federal program. We also have Medi-Cal, which is a little different in the state of California. But the other way that people proactively try to plan for this is actually by buying long-term care insurance. So the LTC stands for long-term care insurance. But some of the plans and the premiums can be prohibitively expensive for families. So another consideration to think about if someone's considering getting a long-term care policy because they're concerned about, being a 4 in 10 female that needs 4 years or plus of coverage, sometimes that premium is really prohibitive, and maybe there's a trade-off in buying a little bit less beefy of a policy, but at least having something in place just in case. Because it's just like we've seen with those statistics, there is not a guarantee that everyone's going to need this. So it needs to be part of that conversation. How risk averse, like what's the risk tolerance when we look at healthcare planning? Is there a history of genetic illness or just some sort of predisposition in family history, or a lot of family members that needed extended care that would make the individual really consider if they should do that? If there is something like that in your family or something for a loved one's family, it does behoove them to have a conversation about it. And if that's the case, to potentially seek out an elder law attorney. They're really the specialists when it comes to Medicaid planning and those types of situations. So another thing is our HSA accounts. They are, and again, we're talking about a lot of different topics here, so thank you guys for bearing with me as we go through it quickly. But HSA accounts are one of the few things that are actually triple tax advantage. You're allowed to set aside the money without paying taxes on it. It's allowed to actually be technically invested depending on the custodian you use. The earnings can grow tax-free, and as long as you use the funds for qualified medical expenses, you can actually withdraw the money without paying taxes. So that's one area that is really newer within the planning realm and kind of the insurance industry. But it's one thing where Congress, and at least in the past, has signaled they want to be able to expand the accessibility for people to access HSA accounts, because these costs, like we've seen, continue to rise, and we need to be proactive in thinking through how can we try to help people set aside additional funds for this just in case something happens. And then same thing with that preference for the in-home care and home health aides. One trade-off though with that piece, if your aging loved one really does prefer to stay in their home, accounting for that social circle, those social connections, and having that conversation too, that can really start to make a serious impact, not just socially, but mentally, cognitively, physically, if they're not getting the social interaction that they need in order to feel like they're part of society and have those connections. So it truly is a consideration. And it is something where we do see a lot of our elders starting to be very lonely. It does start to affect their health, because just having a home health aide to assist is not necessarily replacing those social connections that they might get if they're in a nursing home or in an assisted living facility where they're interacting with more people. Okay, so we talked about some of those long-term planning options in a couple areas, but just to kind of summarize some of those pieces, these are what a lot of people will think about. So family, and consider using more than one option, because there isn't one exact way that this has to be done. And like we said, it really does depend on preferences and what options that your loved one does have. So can family help support? Can they help be a temporary caregiver or a permanent caregiver? One point to note on that, of course, caregiver fatigue, if anyone here does take care of a loved one, is a real thing. And it does take its toll, and it can be like more than another full-time job. So it's something to go into with eyes wide open when we also our expectations for family or friends to help assist and support. Sometimes that's the only option, and that's absolutely fine and understandable. Just one of those things to keep in mind when we're thinking about the different trade-offs here. A lot of people, of course, will use savings, what they've accumulated over time. That increased health expenditure often gets used to cover long-term care costs and long-term care needs. We mentioned insurance briefly, talking about long-term care insurance. There are a combination of life insurance products that have long-term care kind of add-ons or riders. There are annuity options. There are a lot of mixes within there. But I will certainly say, as a financial planner, I would always just encourage you to really do your research if you or someone you care about is thinking about one of these products. There's a reason it's called a product, and there's usually someone that's receiving commission and getting paid for it on the back end. So just being really understanding their compensation structure and having an honest conversation if the amount of insurance is really necessary, and looking at the actual premium costs, because they can be quite substantial. With that being said, there certainly can be a time and a place for some of these different pieces to help support, especially if there's a concern that someone may run out of money, or they might not be as fiscally responsible in managing that money, to make sure they have that chunk set aside for down the line. There are other things like these life plan communities, where there are these community retirement areas or neighborhoods that people often move into, or they move into when they're younger, and there can be some less costs, or that it's very easy to essentially graduate from an actual home into, partially assisted living, into more of a nursing home situation. And those have been cropping up all over the place. Assisted living is certainly less expensive than needing full-time nursing care or a private room, but it's another option to consider as well. And then one thing we often hear about, and a lot of people say, "Oh, I have this equity built up in my home. I would plan to use part of that for this purpose." And that's really, from our perspective, we want that to be more of a last resort option, if possible, because that equity has been building over time, over many, many years, and you want to be ideally not have to liquidate a house at the wrong time, or have to exhaust those resources just because there is a long-term care expense need. So, and again, like the slide mentions, as we've seen right now, real estate market is having quite a good year, but that can also be reversed. And the last thing we want anyone to have to do is to sell at an inopportune time in the market because they're forced to, and take a loss or not make nearly as much as they might have been able to if they didn't need that money in that moment. So just another consideration to keep in mind. So I'm going to kind of quickly switch gears here and talk a bit more about the components that go into, it's really some of the necessary documents when we talk about how planning for aging loved ones. So I don't know how many of you have existing power of attorneys for yourself or for your loved ones, but this is really a crucial part of our aging plan and thinking about this and being proactive with family members or yourself. So these documents that are, if you go to an estate attorney, you're getting a full estate plan. This is almost always included as part of that because it's such an important piece. So what it's really meant to do is you're naming someone ahead of time, generally, who will be authorized to make those really important healthcare decisions on your behalf. It can be such as ending life support or changing you from one facility to another facility. This person has authority to make those decisions for you. And oftentimes this can occur when someone reaches an incapacitation event. Not always, but it's certainly, that's usually the case. You'll have this power of attorney document drafted by an attorney, an estate attorney. It is sitting there ready to go just in case something happens. So if you bumped your head and you happen to be in a coma for a few days, that whoever is on that document can step in to make those important medical decisions with your physicians and care team on your behalf. And this is why it's also so crucial to have some of these conversations with family ahead of time, because you don't want this to be something where the person had no idea and now they are in charge of this and they actually don't know what your wishes or might have been. It can be an extremely stressful situation. It can also be extremely taxing on the person who is the power of attorney. And how it normally goes in terms of the order of operation, generally, if there isn't someone named, the first person the courts would go to, or if someone needs to step in, is a spouse. If there's a living spouse, that's always the first person on the list. The next one is a surviving child, followed by a surviving sibling, a living sibling, followed by an adult, a living grandchild, and then it can actually go to close friends or other relatives. So, but if you are someone that you support your aunt or your uncle, or you yourself are really close with a different best friend you've had your whole life, according to the court system, they're going to follow the general process of who's supposed to step in and take over these decisions if you don't specify it ahead of time. And again, it's really want to make sure you have that conversation with that individual so they know what they're getting into. They feel that they can step in for you, but also so that they understand what your choices are when you think about, DNR, do not resuscitate, and some of those life-ending decisions, if that case were to arise. You don't want to have to make a loved one make that decision for you because it's not specified. Another point to mention that's not listed here, it's really crucial for this document in particular, to be on hand with your primary care physician or with a specialist if you see some specialists, or in with a hospital you normally go to. Because if that paperwork is there ahead of time, at least in a file somewhere, if something does occur, the physician does not have to figure out, and they have to then go back and forth on who to contact to make these decisions. Being part of being organized and being proactive is having this document set aside and also having it ready to go and with the appropriate parties. One last thing to note on here, a power of attorney for healthcare can actually be revoked. A lot of people think that does not happen, but it actually can. So there are a lot of protections, and given the nature that these are potentially substantial healthcare decisions, the patient or the individual at any point in time can actually say, even if they are mentally incapacitated, they technically can say, I don't want you to be the power of attorney for me anymore. I don't want you to be making these decisions. I don't feel comfortable with this. If they say that in front of another witness that's over the age of 18 who's willing to attest to it, that power can be revoked, which is another thing to consider too when we talk about mental incapacitation and what that can mean. So just another thing to mention as well. So that was talking about healthcare and healthcare decisions. And it's always only one person. You can't have two power of attorneys for healthcare, for example, or for property. It's only one individual that you've specified, and generally specified within an estate plan or a trust document. For your actual property, there is a separate power of attorney. So for property itself, you specify a specific individual who will act as your agent regarding investment accounts, your checking and savings accounts, your home, potentially, any real estate or investments. Also, all of the bill pay, property taxes, insurance, everything. This person essentially steps in to take over your entire financial life. I think it goes without saying that you want to make sure whoever is responsible for this, or if you are this for someone else, that you really know what you're getting into and you feel comfortable taking on that financial responsibility, because it is also not insignificant. And it is actually, because there's so many protections, which is a great thing for elders, just to try to avoid financial abuse or financial exploitation, because so much of it does happen. There are a lot of other regulations involved with this aspect as well. So a power of attorney for property is expected to provide detailed accounting and notes at any time if an interested party requests it. They are expected to act in the best interests of the individual, and also keep in mind the best interests of the expected future beneficiaries. So if there is an investment account, let's say there's an extra $50,000 in checking, and maybe it's a child that is the power of attorney, they need to be really mindful of how that money might be spent. It can only be spent on behalf of the individual. It cannot be spent for any other purposes. They are held to a fiduciary standard in that capacity because they have so much control and access to these finances. And again, just have to reiterate how crucial it is to have someone who is financially competent and trustworthy in one of these roles. It is not insignificant. Oftentimes what we see with power of attorney also is this person can actually work with other professionals. They can work with your CPA, your estate attorney, or your attorney, your financial planner, or your investment advisor, and all of these other kind of specialists. They can generally help keep the existing ones there, hire or fire them. Sometimes you have the powers to actually sell a home. So sometimes power of attorneys will sell a property, actually sell the individual's home. Some of those powers can be specified in the document itself. So again, this is where thinking through what's important, what do these pieces look like, is really crucial too, because this can be specified ahead of time. And the last thing you would want is for this agent on your behalf to have more control than you're comfortable with. So there are quite a bit within there too that's really, really crucial. But my kind of final point on this before we move on to the kind of final slides here, really just think through who these individuals are going to be. Oftentimes, the power of attorney for property as well as healthcare can be the same person. If you have an only child, or if there is only one person to make those decisions. Technically, for property, the individual can actually be compensated a fee to do some of those duties if it's specified ahead of time. For healthcare, there actually is not a direct compensation, and that can often be even the individual being the caregiver, and there isn't a direct compensation factor, but that can be accounted for sometimes if that's done with the estate attorney as well. One thing I do want to note here, so I'm going to move on to this next slide, talking about kind of those elements of your estate plan. We've done estate planning workshops with LA Public Library in the past, so I'm sure we'll probably do one again in the future. But there are a number of different components in here, one of which I'll kind of go on a couple slides on. But your estate plan, when you hear someone, oh, I need to update my estate plan, or I'm not sure what this is, It really generally incorporates a couple of these pieces. So your last will and testament, those power of attorneys we talked about. Usually the individual will provide some written instructions for their wishes. And it could be, again, about healthcare decisions, financial decisions in general, all of that. And the trust documents too. So which can incorporate an actual trust. If, as mentioned here, if Medicaid is a consideration, again, we strongly recommend you to consider talking to an experienced elder law attorney. They do have more experience drafting those types of documents than a standard estate attorney does or standard attorney does. So if there is a genetic component in the family, or there is a concern about incapacitation, or specifically about potentially running out of funds, it would really behoove people to do their research and contact someone who specializes in this field. I did not go into it too much on the Medicaid part, but that could be an entire topic in and of itself. Generally, how it works, if the Medicaid will step in to cover those long-term care needs if they have to, because the individual doesn't have any more resources. So certainly don't want anyone to get the impression that you're kicked to the curb if you don't have enough to cover your long-term care needs. The government does step in to cover that on your behalf. The caveat to that, though, is it's only meant to be provided for people that don't have assets and have low income or no income. So according to Medicaid, you can technically only have up to $2,000 in your name, and have that's the amount you're allowed to keep if you're subject to Medicaid. You must spend down. So let's say you have $100,000 in a 401k from your working years. You would have to, depending on how it's titled, you'd have to spend that down to $2,000 in order for Medicaid to step in. So this is where that estate plan and the estate planning part really comes into play here, because certain types of trusts can be used. There are certain other elements of the estate plan that can help protect some of those assets potentially. If you are married, your spouse, the Medicaid does allow an amount to be set aside for your spouse so that your spouse is not also destitute in order for you to qualify. Oftentimes that includes like the primary residence up to a certain amount of money. But a key part for this day and age, a partner that's not an actual spouse does not technically qualify. So it's another really important part to pay attention to how your assets are titled, how your house is titled, how your investment accounts are titled. And I know this is drinking from the fire hose here, so I'm guessing there are going to be some questions back behind the scenes, but there's quite a bit to this, and it can be quite nuanced. So it's really, really important. And what the main point I want to get across, hopefully, is seek out really good or experienced professionals if you're looking into some of this. This is not areas where you want to handle this yourself necessarily, because of the impacts, the implications too of what this can mean if it's done incorrectly you can't even describe how large they can be. Whereas paying an attorney to properly draft your estate plan, your trust documents, all these different pieces, while fees will certainly range between attorneys, and it really does vary by expertise and geographic location, they do generally cost at least a minimum $2,000, and they can scale significantly depending on the complexity and the amount of assets. But this is why doing this planning ahead of time really, really can pay off in the end because of the implications down the line. So talking about getting organized and some of the checklists, some of these different pieces, again, I can't reiterate enough that family discussion and how important it is to have this conversation. Hopefully some of the workshop today emphasized why these decisions and these conversations should happen ahead of time, and determine that main contact in the family. Who's going to help to come up with the care plan? Who's going to be responsible? That's going to be the power of attorney for some of these things. Oftentimes, different members of the family might help with different stages in the aging process. Or if this person has very young children, they might not be able to, but later on, 10, 15 years from now, they may be able to step in to help and assist an aging loved one more. Make sure that if it's yours, you know where your wills and your healthcare records are, your trust documents. If you're helping a loved one, make sure you know where theirs is. And if they don't, you spend some time with them, try to get those documents together. It's so crucial to have them on hand and to know who to contact if something comes up. Also, a list of advisors is always recommended. Who's their attorney? Do you have their contact information, the name of their firm? Same thing with doctors and healthcare providers, specialists, prescriptions for any sort of drugs or pharmacies they go to. Also, spiritual advisors. Who do they like to turn to if they need some guidance? Know about adult daycare centers that could be in the area. Also, who are their insurance agents to make sure those policies stay in place, or if something's needed because something occurs and you need to be able to get in touch with them. Certainly with, if they work with an advisor, a wealth manager, a financial planner, really important to have those conversations and ideally to meet them if it's for a parent or a loved one. So you're familiar with who they are and you feel comfortable with that individual. Another piece on getting organized. So key things to consider. Review those finances also. If you're helping a loved one, keep an eye on their checking accounts and saving accounts. Look for strange patterns in spending. Keep an eye on what might be happening with those accounts. It really does happen, and unfortunately, all over this country, there is a ton of elder abuse in this way. And it's really important for you to be an advocate for your loved ones and keeping an eye on some of those pieces so they're not subjected to some of those scams and schemes. Passwords are a huge one. And where are they located for computers, for accounts, safety deposit boxes, list of the contents, where's the key? I had a conversation with my own father about this, and he has no idea where his safety deposit box is or the key. We've got to figure this out. This is not good. But again, same thing, medication lists. And again, monitor those statements and those different pieces. So to kind of summarize, have those candid conversations once again, ensure estate plan documents are updated and in order with power of attorneys, really engage those legal professionals or the other experts you need or other professionals you need to ensure things are in order. And then again, reach out when you do need some assistance. So I would be remiss without adding in a few slides on where to get some help, because there's a lot and we barely scratched the surface on this topic and all of the different branching implications and what the different areas it touches. So here are a number of websites, locations, nonprofits, just government sponsored sites for you to check out to find out more information, or if you need some assistance, you're trying to find an elder attorney. So take a snapshot of this screen if you want to, and would highly recommend doing some more research yourselves if this is part of your current conversation you're having. And lastly, at least for us in the Financial Planning Association, if the planning side of things, working with a wealth manager, that's part of your conversation too. The planner search was where you can actually research people like us, look at where they're located, their fee structure, how they're compensated, how they like to have those conversations. You can look up their records to check if they're reputable or not. It'll have everything on there forever. So really do your due diligence on all of those professionals you might work with or you might work with on behalf of a loved one. And certainly there's some resources there for what to look out for when you're looking at an actual advisor or a planner. And with that, I yield back to if there are any questions from our conversation. I'm actually going to go back to the slide so you guys can take a look if anyone wants any of those web addresses.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jamie. So that was a great presentation. There's a lot of valuable information on there. Just speaking from my perspective, this is during this lockdown, I actually did spend the time and I did estate planning and durable, kind of powers of attorney and all that. It was, it actually felt, I thought it would feel strange, but it actually felt very kind of comforting and or even sort of relaxing to actually kind of know some of these things are taken care of. My wife and I don't have children, so we need to have these things sort of straightened out in life ahead of time. And I guess with, things are going around us, gave you time to think and also, time to prepare. So the situation was a good time for it. So, and, I've also been involved in, elder care situations of my own. So I sort of knew trying to avoid those mistakes. And I think, we learned a lot of valuable information here tonight.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that you did it. That's the thing. It can feel like such a pain to go through that process. Oh, I have to get all my documents together. I have to figure out where all these different pieces are. It's kind of weird to think about that. Where do I want my assets to go down the line? Who do I want to do these decisions for me if I can't? But that's the general part. It's usually a sense of stress relief when we have these documents in place, so your wishes are accounted for and everything is taken care of. That's great. I'm so glad. Thank you for sharing, Bob.
Yeah. So, okay. Just checking to see if there's any other questions here in the chat at all. Let's see. So, let's see. Yes, this is going to be available. Again, this if you're just coming in late, this will be available on the archived on the library's YouTube channel. Just look for Los Angeles Library, all one word pushed together, and you should be able to find this one in here as well as all the other presentations from Financial Planning Week.
Perfect. I want to make one mention. I see one of the comments about someone had with long-term care and a negative experience. And certainly, I'm so sorry you had that experience. One area where we would absolutely still have to keep an eye on those, because at the end of the day, it's insurance, and they're going to oftentimes look to not pay those claims. So it's really important that the provider, again, selected many years ago, it's a reputable one and that you think will be there for a long time, because sometimes they do have very small caveats where they won't pay. So it's really crucial to work with a good insurance individual for those, because people can be paying into them for a substantial amount of time, and it can be very difficult to deal with. And thank you for sharing your story. I mean, it's a challenge, and sounds like you're really helping your mom. So I'm sure she appreciates it.
Okay. Well, I want to thank Jamie for taking the time, and thanking Jamie's dog, and my cat did not make an appearance. So
I apologize, everybody.
So you need to have quieter. You need to have seasons where you have quieter pets. They're better for these presentations. But you again said watch this later if you want to watch it from the beginning, or you can watch it on YouTube. You can also watch it, and then you can pause it and look through different parts, because I said there are a lot of charts, but the information is all very useful, and it's good. You can kind of approach it in smaller chunks that way too. So, and with that, thank you very much for coming by, all of you today who watched, and please check the channel. And tomorrow afternoon and noon will be the Financial Literacy Basics program. Thank you.